Ladies and gentlemen, we are here. Most of us are online, so sorry for not being in person with you, Owen, for your PhD defense. So I'll give you the floor to explain the main point of your dissertation. So during something like 40 minutes, and then there will be the discussion with the members of the jury.
Okay, but thanks very much, Anna, and thanks for the other jury members, Catherine, Stein, Eric, and Pierre Philippe for being here and for taking the time to read my thesis. So today I'm going to be presenting my research that we've been doing over the last 3 years on decision-making methodologies, and in particular quantitative decision-making methodologies for the contracting and development of hydrogen production systems. And in particular, we're looking at green hydrogen production using electrolysis from renewable energy, and looking at the decisions around asset sizing and energy hedging to reduce risk in these types of projects to allow investment. So first, I'm going to give a bit more of an overview of what is green hydrogen and a HPA, which is a contract for the sale of hydrogen, and why that's important for the development in the industry. And then I'll be going into a bit more detail, different components that make up a project, then into the methodology and the model that we've developed to carry out the research, and then presenting some different results and then some concluding remarks. So first, it's a bit of an introduction for hydrogen for those who aren't too familiar with it. It's a gas that is currently used for a number of industrial uses, in particular fertilizer production and in oil refining. But at the moment, hydrogen is almost entirely produced by processes that use fossil fuels, and it emits a lot of carbon dioxide in these processes. When we talk about green hydrogen, we're talking about hydrogen that is created by electrolysis using an electrolyzer. And that process uses electricity to basically break apart a water molecule into hydrogen oxygen gas. And when we use renewable electricity as that electricity source, that hydrogen gas is created without carbon emissions. And so we can then use it to decarbonize those existing uses, such as oil refining and fertilizer production. But then there are also quite a number of other new uses for hydrogen. And so we could use hydrogen to decarbonize steel making, different uses in transportation, and also for making sustainable fuels. My thesis is carried out in partnership with Verso Energy, which is a French renewable energy flexibility and green hydrogen developer, quite appropriately. And this is a bit of an overview of a number of projects that Verso has here in France. And they cover a number of these different use cases that I mentioned, such as transportation, steelmaking, and other uses. So to set the scene a bit for the context of this research, supposing we are very feeling very optimistic about the future markets for hydrogen. We think that we're going to be able to sell a lot of green hydrogen in the future. We first need to build an electrolyzer, and to do this, we'll need quite a lot of money because they're quite expensive. And so we'll probably have to go to the bank for a loan. The bank, however, is very suspicious, and they're a bit worried that we might not make enough money we'll have trouble finding customers for our hydrogen. And so they will ask us to come back when we can show them that we have someone who's committed to buy this hydrogen over the long term, so that we can repay our debts to the bank. And so we go off looking for an off-taker, someone who's going to commit to buying this hydrogen. And we say, how about we enter into a long-term contract, so where you will commit to buying my hydrogen and I will commit to producing it for you. And this is all fine, although it's still quite difficult to get people to sign up to this type of contract, because there are still some green hydrogen is still relatively expensive compared to not decarbonizing anything in the existing processes. And it's also exposed to quite a lot of risks, which I'll go into in a minute. And these risks affect the production costs. Just to reinforce this point, we can see that the IEA and a number of other think tanks and research groups in energy are noting that the amount of investment going into green energy, and also particularly into hydrogen production, is lagging behind what expectations we have for achieving net zero. And also, it's been noted by many people in industry that the large amount of risks in these projects is holding back investment. So what are the different components of a green hydrogen project, and where are the risks in such a project? So as we mentioned before, the base of the project is the demand for hydrogen, where you need to find a consumer who's going to buy it for long term. The price of the hydrogen is going to be about half the capex costs associated with the electrolyzer, storage tank, and network connection. And then the second half is going to be the electricity sourcing, because we need a lot of electricity to make hydrogen. And a lot of research and also industrial studies will usually cost the electricity sourcing just based on the spot market. But in reality, because the spot market is very volatile, very uncertain, there's a lot of risk involved. Producers will usually try to hedge this risk or buy this electricity in advance to reduce the electricity sourcing risk. And they will do this usually using one, two, or of these options. The first, renewable energy power purchase agreements, where we commit to buying a certain amount of renewable energy over a long period of time from a given park. And the futures market, where we buy electricity in advance, locking in a set price, and we receive a block of energy sometime in the future. And it's important to note the different delivery profiles of these two different hedging options. If we are going to predominantly use renewable energy PPAs for electricity sourcing, you can see that we're getting delivered electricity only during certain periods of the day. That's supposing this is a solar PPA. And this might lead us to oversize the electrolyzer so that we can make the most of those peak periods, and then add some storage so that we can ride through the periods where there is less production. On the other hand, if we are just going to use the futures market for our electricity sourcing, we're going to be delivered electricity just in a straight band across the year. And so that might lead us to reduce the size of the electrolyzer, so save money on the electrolyzer, and just run it consistently across the year. So you can see that these two, the procurement strategy, even though it's often not covered in literature and in a lot of industrial studies, is actually quite linked to the equipment investment. The electricity sourcing also has ramifications for our eligibility for green hydrogen classifications and subsequently for subsidies. So this is another thing to take into account that we'll discuss later. And finally, noting the sources of uncertainty in this project. As I discussed before, the spot market prices are very uncertain. We also have uncertain production from our renewable energy PPAs. And we may have a certain amount of uncertainty in the actual consumption profile of the consumer, although we can manage this uncertainty somewhat using the offtake contract, which we will also discuss soon. So the overall thesis objectives is to respond to these questions that the producer needs to make right now for a project that may start in several years and is going to run for 10 years. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty in those future values, but we still need to make these very costly and important decisions now. And so the first decision is how to size the assets, and in particular the electrolyzer and storage. And there's a number of domains we can draw on in the scientific literature to look at this, in particular just capacity expansion in energy systems, and in particular multi-energy systems using hydrogen. For the energy procurement question, how to what strategy to use to obtain our power in the future. This there's quite a lot of energy hedging literature out there, and this energy hedging literature often uses the same type of risk-averse stochastic formulation that we use in this work, which I will detail in a minute. And then there's also some literature on how to structure contracts in the energy world, and that we can find relevant literature around PPAs, natural gas and hydrogen contracts. And finally, how should we plan these decisions, taking into account that regulation is different in different places, and the regulation is actually going to change in the future. And there's especially in recent years, there's been quite a lot of interesting research on that area as well. The problem is that these different scientific literature domains are usually not more than 2 is covered at any one time, and we need to make a methodology that allows us to make these decisions taking into account all these different considerations. And so a key objective of this thesis is to unify these different scientific literature domains into something that allows us to answer these very real questions faced by producers in industry at the moment. Now going into the model and the methodology that we've used to try to unify these different domains. This is the framework that was developed in this thesis for taking into account these different considerations. At the heart of the framework is the model, which is a mathematical program, a linear program of a market-focused hydrogen producer. We use a planning policy to obtain a solution to that model, which is a set of design decisions, and I'll explain this in more detail later. And then we test these design decisions on 1,000 out of sample scenarios to see if they actually are effective decisions or not. And feeding into that, we have some particularities of the hydrogen purchase agreement. As I said before, this can affect the uncertainty in demand, among other things. And also we make some adjustments based on the regulatory context, and that will be discussed later as well. But first, to get a bit more of an idea of what the mathematical model consists of, as discussed before, at the very base of the model is always the demand for hydrogen. In this case, for our case study used throughout this thesis, we used a demand profile that would be appropriate for transportation use, so refueling station maybe for trucks or something like that. And we used a fixed amount per year, but there may be uncertainty in the seasonal changes in consumption and also daily consumption. This hydrogen demand may be fed directly by the electrolyzer, or the hydrogen may be produced by electrolyzer, stored in storage and fed to the demand at a later time. The electricity to the electrolyzer comes from may come from multiple sources. The first being the day-ahead market, which is the spot market in Europe. And that is, as we said before, extremely variable. We've used 10 years of historical data and then used statistical manipulations of those time series to create additional scenarios. If the producer would like to avoid the risk of these highly, sometimes very expensive day-ahead market scenarios, they can hedge firstly using PPAs, power purchase agreements, as discussed before. And we use 9 different PPAs, including wind and solar in these different locations in metropolitan France. And then there's the futures. And so we also model peak load futures, which also which provide electricity just during the daytime hours effectively of the day. And so when we're looking to make a solution to this model, a solution is a set of design decisions which include the asset capacities and the optimal electricity procurement mix for the project. So we now know what the model is, but when we want to make decisions using this model, we need what's called a planning policy. And a planning policy can be very simple. It may just be that we will always size the electrolyzer to the maximum hourly consumption of the hydrogen demand, but they may also be more complex, and we will show you some examples of some more complex ones than that. And to compare a number of common approaches to planning policies, we've looked in particular at these 3 nuances of a planning policy to investigate in further detail. And so first, to make a distinction between deterministic and stochastic models or planning policies. Firstly, starting off with the simpler one, which is the deterministic model. In this case, we have our decisions separated into design decisions, which is the final, which is the end solution we're looking to obtain using the planning policy, and operational decisions. So when in our model, we make design decisions and then have a set of operational decisions that for every hour of the year. And these operational decisions are made based on what our capacities and volumes were in the design decisions, as well as the realizations of a scenario. In this case, in the deterministic case, a single scenario that contains the uncertain variables, oh, it contains the variables for renewable production, as well as the day ahead market price and the demand for 1 hour time steps all across the year. And when we find a solution to this problem, we are minimizing the total costs, which include the cost of these design decisions, which can be CapEx costs, but also energy procurement costs for, say, futures, as well as the operational cost. And the operational cost comes from all our exchanges with the day ahead market summed across the year. And we minimize both of these together. When we change to a stochastic model, we are effectively making the same decisions, the design decisions, but we're optimizing them across a number of second stage scenarios. So those operational scenarios in 1 hour time steps across the year. And in this case, instead of just having a single operational cost, we have many operational costs. And we minimize using this function here, weighting between the expected value of the operational costs and the worst case operational costs, which we obtain using the conditional value at risk. And we toggle between these expected value and worst case using a risk aversion factor. So 0 giving us risk neutral and 1 giving us 100% risk averse. And so this leads into the second differentiation, which is risk neutral and risk averse. So using this function, this optimization problem, we can come up with these 4 different approaches to, or 4 different planning policies. We have risk neutral, deterministic, and risk neutral stochastic policies. And so the stochastic is only using expected value because the risk aversion factor is set to 0. For the risk averse policies in the stochastic case, we simply set the risk aversion factor to 0.9, which weights it heavily towards the worst case scenario, but also including a portion of the expected value. And for the deterministic risk averse, we have used a heuristic, which is a rule that says we will always hedge our expected demand using the lowest cost PPAs available to us. So our expected PPA production will match our expected demand in the future because we are wanting to avoid exchanges with the day ahead market, which could be very high. And in a second step, we optimize then the equipment capacities. Looking now just at the last and possibly the most hardest to explain of these nuances for planning policies. When we are running the model, we need to decide what prices we would choose for the electricity futures as well as the PPAs in the model, because these are always changing. They're not as fixed as, say, the equipment capacities. And a typical thing to do for futures prices is to assume that they are risk neutral, which is to say that if supposing we have a futures price of 70 euros here, and we have these 3 scenarios for what might happen in the future on the spot market. If this price is risk neutral, then the profit we will get when the day ahead market price is higher than what we paid for the futures, so we can sell it for a profit, that portion is going to be equal to the loss that we would make if these lower price scenarios were to eventuate. And so when this all equals out, we can say that it's risk neutral. Unfortunately for PPAs, it's a bit more complicated. They're often priced lower than the market expected value due to a number of reasons, which can cause problems in the optimization, as I'll explain now. So if we then have a PPA price, which is lower than what we expect the market to be, this gain that we could potentially make when the price is high is going to be very big compared to the losses we might make if it's lower. And so a risk neutral optimization is going to see that it on average, it's going to make profit with this PPA option. And so it's going to always want to make more profit, and it will try to subscribe to an infinite amount of PPA capacity, which is not realistic. No one is going to do that in real life. And so modelers often use two options to deal with this. In particular, what's commonly done in a lot of studies is to use a no resale formulation, where we simply don't include this resale profit dynamic in the model. What we propose could be a better option is to use risk-averse optimization when making these decisions, and making sure that you have some scenarios where there is the possibility to have a loss, because the risk-averse optimization will increase the weighting of these loss scenarios to balance out the model in the end. And so a question we'll be trying to answer is, what is the impact of using these no resale formulations, which are quite common? So that was the last nuance of the planning policy. We'll now just quickly jump to the way we model hydrogen purchase agreements, because this is quite an open question, how to model these types of contracts, because as a bespoke bilateral contract, there's really an infinite number of ways we could design one. And so we have to start somewhere to start analyzing these. And so in the context of this thesis, we've in particular looked at the way volumetric obligations affect the uncertainty in demand in these types of projects. And the way we've chosen to model that is in particular with respect to scenario generation for the demand scenarios. If we have a set of conditions with respect to volumes to be supplied in the hydrogen purchase agreement, these effectively create an envelope in which uncertainty is allowed in the contract. If we say that in the contract, there's a very strict rule that you can't exceed an hourly consumption limit, then that means that in our scenario generation, assuming there's heavy penalties for exceeding this, we can assume that our demand will not vary above that. And so we can then vary randomly different scenarios within that envelope to model that uncertainty that's left over. Now going into the first set of results, where we in particular look to compare those different planning policies, or the different nuances of planning policies. So first, if we look at the differences between the risk averse and risk neutral planning policies, here we have four formally defined planning policies. The top two, which are in blue here, are deterministic with a risk neutral policy and a risk averse policy. And the yellow here are stochastic policies, one risk neutral, one risk averse. They're in red. And to interpret the plots on the right, first we have the hydrogen equipment power capacity. And so that's the output capacity of the electrolyzer and the hydrogen storage. Next, we have the energy capacity of the hydrogen storage installed. This is the hedging ratio of the project, which is our energy hedging options here on the right. So solar PPAs, wind PPAs, and futures baseload. And if we have a hedging ratio of 1, that means that the expected volume from our hedging options meets the expected volume of the demand. So if we have a hedging ratio of 1, it means that we expect to fully cover the volume of our demand with hedging options. And finally, and in particular, most important for evaluating the effectiveness of different policies is the production costs. And so we analyze the production costs as the levelized cost of hydrogen, which is basically integrating the CapEx and the OpEx costs into a unit cost per kilo of hydrogen. And the bars represent the mean levelized cost of hydrogen, and the whiskers represent the maximum and the minimum levelized cost of hydrogen for a single scenario, because this represents the mean and the maximum in for a distribution of levelized cost of hydrogen using that solution. And so we can see straight away that these risk-averse policies do a lot better. So they achieve a much lower levelized cost of hydrogen, in particular with the maximum or the worst case scenario production cost. And the yeah, that reduction is very, very big. So 32% for those cases. And so we can see straight away that even for whether it be deterministic or stochastic, risk aversion against market uncertainty is very important for avoiding bad outcomes. Next, looking at the difference between deterministic and stochastic modeling. As we discussed before, deterministic is where we're optimizing on one single average scenario, whereas stochastic, we're optimizing across a set of scenarios. And so this allows us to model the uncertainty. And in this case, yeah, so we have the deterministic in blue, the stochastic in yellow. And in this case, we're also going to look at different hydrogen purchase agreement types. The first, well, starting with no uncertainty in demand. Then in the second, adding uncertainty in demand. And then in the third, uncertainty in demand and the possibility for green hydrogen subsidies. And so this adds some more complexity to our electricity sourcing decisions. And so when we look at the very simple hydrogen purchase agreement case, which is this first column, we can see that the deterministic policy does just as well as the stochastic policy. There's yeah, not much difference at all. However, in the more complicated HPA types, there is significant improvements from using the stochastic policy, and that is both on average and on worst case performance. And so we can see that while in very strict cases, which if we're being honest with ourselves, are not going to be that common in the real world, we may be able to use deterministic planning. However, for more realistic projects that do have demand uncertainty, that do have complexity, stochastic modeling is quite important for making good decisions, taking into account all of this. Finally, the last nuance that we spoke about with respect to no resale formulations, where we don't take into account the resale value of the different hedging options. To do this, we look at the difference between a risk-averse stochastic policy and the same policy, but just with that no resale constraint added. And in this case, we see that using that no resale formulation, we have a worse production costs, so our production cost has increased. And this is logical because we're actually removing a dynamic in the problem that exists in the real world, and this approximation biases certain hedging instruments against other ones. And so this can also be seen in the very stark difference between the hedging options selected by the two policies. So for the regular policy, we use quite a lot of PPAs, and then in the no resale policy, we use quite a lot of futures. And what are the impacts of these different planning policy nuances in the real world? Well, we're often using these planning policies to see if a particular project is viable or profitable or not, and also we're using. We're looking to find a price that we can offer to the off-taker that will make it acceptable to us. And we want that price to be as low as possible so that the off-taker can accept it. And if we're using simple policies, such as a deterministic policy, we're probably going to have a hydrogen price that is going to be higher than if we use a more complex policy that's better able to take into account that complexity. And this is likely to result in us being able to identify more projects that are actually viable. Now moving on to the second set of results, where we look in a bit more detail at the impact of different regulations on hydrogen production. So this is important because the regulations around hydrogen production are likely to change over time here in Europe and in the US. And we may also want to see if these different the different hydrogen regulations in different places, such as Australia, such as America, are going to influence the development of the industry in different ways. So when we look at the regulation around green hydrogen production, in particular, we are looking at, well, in our study, we looked at these two particular regulations. The first one, temporal correlation rules, fits into what is commonly called the three pillars of green eligible renewable sources for hydrogen production. And to give you a quick overview, basically these rules are all about not using, for example, coal generated electricity to produce hydrogen, because the objective is to use less fossil fuels, emit less. And if we're just burning coal to make the hydrogen, it's not very green, is it? So the first rule about geographic correlation says that the renewable energy production should be located in the same system as the electrolyzer. And so that means we shouldn't be buying renewable electricity in, say, Iceland, and then saying that this is associated with hydrogen that we're producing in Germany, and we're burning coal to make it in Germany. The temporal correlation is saying that the production of hydrogen should be more or less the same time as the renewable energy is produced. And additionality is saying that we should be producing hydrogen from new renewable sources and not using existing renewable sources to produce hydrogen. In particular, in our study, we focused on the temporal correlation aspect, in particular because there's quite a lot of variation in this rule between different locations. And in Europe and the US, it's set to change in 2030. And so if we are going to commit to a hydrogen project over 10 years, we do need to be, we do need to have an understanding of how this change is going to affect our decisions. And yeah, and so yes, that's what I just said. To add a little bit more complexity, we also have the possibility, especially in Europe, to produce low carbon hydrogen instead of green hydrogen. And the nuance here is that green hydrogen production you can think of as renewable hydrogen production. And so we have to meet these three pillar requirements with green eligible renewable sources. And we will receive, in the context of our study, a €3 subsidy for green renewable hydrogen. We also have the possibility of producing low carbon hydrogen if we're connected to a grid that has a very low carbon intensity. And so metropolitan France is an example of this. There's not a huge amount of renewables in France, but there's a lot of nuclear. And so the energy mix of France is highly decarbonized. And so if we would we can produce low carbon hydrogen in France without meeting these temporal correlation and additionality requirements. However, this is not eligible for a subsidy. And the way we model these two different types of hydrogen for the time matching or temporal correlation required for green hydrogen eligibility, we effectively perform a max between the total amount of renewable energy production we have at a given moment and the total amount of hydrogen we're producing from the electrolyzer at that same time. And then we accumulate that across the year and then apply the subsidy. For low carbon hydrogen, the question is quite simple: is if it's a low carbon grid, then we can produce it. If it's not a low carbon grid, then we can't produce it. And if we can't produce low carbon hydrogen just directly from the grid without any time matching, it means that everything has to be time matched and everything has to be green. And so we add this additional minimum green constraint, I call it in the manuscript, which makes sure that you are only producing this time matched hydrogen. And to give a formal definition of a number of regulatory contexts to compare, we first have the high CO2 grid cases in blue here, and annual, monthly, and hourly time matching for each of those, where we have to produce 100% green hydrogen. And we can see that up until 2030, this is going to be the case for annual time matching in Texas and in Australia. New South Wales is a state in Australia, and monthly time matching in Germany. And then after 2030, this will move to hourly time matching for Texas and Germany. The second three definitions are the low CO2 grid cases, again, annual, monthly, and hourly. And the only example of these I've given here is France. And so we'll be with a monthly time matching up until 2030 in France, and then hourly following that. And so what are the impacts of these different regulatory contexts? One of the, there's quite a lot of different things we can say. The hourly time matching is clearly more expensive than the less strict cases. And also we can see that when we have a highly carbon intense grid and we're only able to produce green hydrogen that's time matched, that leads us to oversize our procurement of renewable energy production. So we don't have the option of just not producing time matched electricity because we can produce low carbon, which is what we can do in these low CO2 grids, which have a relatively stable procurement strategy. In the high CO2 grids, we need to make sure we're always getting enough energy from these sources to produce the time matched hydrogen all the time. And so that leads us to very much oversize these sources. And so that can then lead to these big changes in the final production cost because of the integrated resale value of that excess energy. Finally, to think about how these different time matching rules affect the carbon intensity of the produced hydrogen, we can see these are the US, EU, and Australian low carbon limits for low carbon hydrogen in terms of carbon intensity. And we can see that in the interim rules up until 2030, where it's monthly time matching in Europe and annual time matching in the US, none of these cases in high CO2 grids is going to meet the low carbon limit. However, after 2030, when we go to the stricter hourly time matching, this no longer is a problem in Europe and the US. However, Australia has not proposed to change from annual time matching. And so this will result in a case in Australia where you may have supposedly green, it can be officially termed green hydrogen while vastly exceeding what the expected carbon intensity is supposed to be. And so this shows the importance of hourly time matching requirements for ensuring the low carbon credentials of green hydrogen. Finally, well, the final set of results that we will look at today is the impact of pricing structures in the HPA. And so something to consider is that up until this point, we've been looking at just the production costs, which is the levelized cost of hydrogen for a producer. But this doesn't say anything about the price that we will actually sell this hydrogen to the consumer at. And when we're deciding on this price, we have to, first of all, remember that the bank is very suspicious of us and they want us to make sure that in any scenario, we will be able to repay our debt to them for that we use to build the electrolyzer. On the other hand, what's quite common for off-takers is that they don't want a complicated pricing structure. They want something that is going to give them long-term visibility of their prices. And so they're often asking for a fixed price across a 10-year contract. And so we as the producer then have to decide of this distribution of production costs, which price will I sell to the consumer at? And if we take at face value these two requirements, that we need to choose a fixed price for the consumer, and the bank wants to make sure we will always make money or at least break even in any scenario, it means that we should offer a price to the consumer which is the maximum of our production cost distribution. And so this can lead us to offer some very high prices to the consumer. So this dotted line here shows the probability density of the sale price to the consumer. And if it's fixed, it's just 100% probability at this high price, around 10. And so this is going to make it very hard to get the off-taker to agree to the project as it's so expensive. But maybe we can use a indexed contract to improve the results for the off-taker and for us in obtaining the signature of the off-taker. And so just looking at a very simple example of an index contract here, which effectively works a bit like an option with index component, which can increase the impact of that option on the price. And the in this problem structure, we're looking to minimize the, rather than just saying we'll always sell to you at the maximum price, we're going to look to minimize the average price paid by the consumer across all the scenarios. And we're also going to make sure that we as the producer are always profitable to make sure that the bank is happy. And so what this will, after we optimize that for a given case, this is for a particular case study, we have these values here, which would then form the written formula in the contract. And this PDA component is the average day ahead price. So this is the index we're using here is the average day ahead price, but theoretically you could use any index that both parties agreed to. And so the results of this index variable contract, this is the probability distribution here, which shows that you have a lot more scenarios that are much lower cost, say around 6 compared to 10, than higher cost scenarios. And overall, it actually reduces the mean sale price by 33% with respect to the fixed contract. And so how is this possible? Because we can't just pull money out of thin air just by throwing some numbers around. What this is actually doing is risk sharing between the two parties. So the pricing structure basically defines the final risk allocation. After we've done all our hedging, etc., there's still some remaining risk. And by using an index contract, this effectively shares a positive risk. So a positive the possibility for windfall profits, which using a fixed contract would just be kept by the producer. By using the index contract, we're actually sharing the possibility for that profit with the consumer. And it's possible to arrive at this mutually beneficial situation for the two parties because they have different risk preferences. So if we can usually have cheaper prices for the consumer, that's going to be better for them overall, and it's going to be better for us, the producer, overall, because we'll be more likely to find a consumer. And finally, to conclude, the key contributions of the study is the market-focused model, the stochastic linear program for green hydrogen production, including these different hedging options, a framework for uncertainty modeling and decision making in the context of this type of project, where we have an obligation to sell hydrogen over a long period of time under a hydrogen purchase agreement, and also different regulatory environments. Different methods for optimizing and analyzing residual risk in HPAs, hydrogen purchase agreements, and some future directions that could be approached that follow on from this work. While the framework allows us to effectively look at any different combinations of conditions in hydrogen purchase agreements, we've only used I would say, a relatively small set of possibilities. And so there's quite a lot of scope to analyze additional HPA conditions and their effects on these projects. In terms of larger system modeling, quite a lot of system level modeling is done using expected value. And so this means that we might expect the future price of hydrogen to be cheaper than it will actually be, due to these particular dynamics of risk aversion and the desire to have these long-term contracts. And so that can push the price of hydrogen up relative to what we expect in a system level study. And so integrating this risk averse behavior could be useful for obtaining better predictions of the rollout of the hydrogen economy. And finally, while the overall model used was stochastic in terms of the design decisions, the short-term operational scenarios is solved deterministically. And so really we would like to include some things like forecasting error and things like that to improve the validity of the results, and also to improve the quality of the decisions, we could also use multi-stage decisions over the longer term that would allow us to gradually increase electrolyzer capacity with increasing demand, or to change our hedging strategy based on changes in the market over time. And finally, this is a list of the publications. I'm very happy that our journal article is now at minor revisions, which is very exciting. And this is a list of some of the presentations that I've done in different conferences, and also different working groups in some other research centers. And I think I finished 25 seconds early, but that is all. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Owen Palmer, the committee has deliberated on based on your PhD defense, and I'm now going to read what it is our assessment of the defense that we have found of very high quality. The candidate's presentation was clear and complementary to the manuscript. It was outstanding, as it has cleverly summarized the key ideas of the manuscript. Mr. Palmer demonstrated excellent mastery of the methodology employed. During the defense, he extensively discussed his results and answered the questions posed by the referees and the examiners. He clarified the details he was asked about and successfully positioned his research within a broader context of the model he has proposed in the manuscript. His research is very timely and offers a rigorous modeling perspective on fundamental questions such as hydrogen contracts, market design, and the importance of risk aversion. He demonstrated a solid approach from a technological, industrial, and engineering standpoint. His responses to the question behind his modeling were convincing, showcasing his maturity and research skills. Based on this excellent evaluation and taking into account the quality of the manuscript, we award you the title of, I'm going to say it in French, Docteur en énergétique et procédé de l'Université Mines PSL, and we congratulate you for such an achievement.
Okay. Je vais le lire.
It's all you can say. Congratulations. Yes,
You.
and then if you have chosen to do so, you read the integrity charter.
Okay, so I have chosen to do so. I'm going to do so in French. En présence de mes pairs, parvenu à l'issue de mon doctorat en procédés et énergie, c'était ça? Oui. Ayant ainsi pratiqué dans ma quête du savoir l'exercice d'une recherche scientifique exigeante en cultivant la rigueur intellectuelle, la réflexivité éthique et dans le respect des principes de l'intégrité scientifique, je m'engage pour ce qui dépendra de moi dans la suite de ma carrière professionnelle, quel qu'en soit le secteur ou le domaine de l'activité, à maintenir un conduite intègre dans mon rapport au savoir, mes méthodes et mes résultats.
Très bien. Sorry for not attending you. Maybe it's a little bit frustrating because you have most of your committee online, but it is not that we are not, participating, and very happy to be part of this adventure.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Stein, Eric, and Catherine as well for the really interesting questions and discussion. I really enjoyed it, and thanks so much for taking the time to read the manuscript, and for Catherine and Stein, Eric, to give me your reports as well, which raised many interesting questions. And I would also like to thank and to Philippe as well. So and especially thank you for being our token present jury member. I would also very much like to thank my supervisors, Robin, for all the support and the really interesting directions you've helped us take this thesis. It's been a real pleasure working with you. I think for all my supervisors, I can say that what has made the thesis so enjoyable is working with three people who are also very curious and very uh, lovely people on a personal level, and it's been a real pleasure. Yeah, I'd like to thank as well Simon, especially, and I think I mentioned the thesis of always being available at the last minute when I need to submit an article the following week, and rereading my work, and of course, Hugo, for just being so present throughout all of the work that I've done all across this thesis, always having the time to help me find even problems in code, and think about very much detail the work that I've been doing, as well as the bigger picture. It couldn't have been the same work without you, and so thank you. Yeah. Oh, and I'd also like to thank especially my parents who are here today. Yeah, they've been really important support for me over the years, and especially during the last 3 years during this thesis. And I'd like to thank all my friends, many of whom are here, but I think in terms of my colleagues from per se, I'd especially like to thank a few people who aren't here today. Lucas, Julia, and also Kontan, who I believe has started working with Eric this week. So
today, this morning.
So please tell Kontan I said hello, Eric. And and then all my other colleagues, the staff here, and the heads of school, George and Arnaud, have been really supportive. I would also like to thank the staff like Bridget, Lauren, and Sophie for helping me with various administrative things and IT things, and my other friends from Australia, and also other friends in Europe for supporting me along this time. And then, of course, everyone at Verso Energy, especially Antoine, who entrusted me with this project. And as Robin said, it's not every small company has leadership that is insightful enough to think about investing in the long-term innovation, and so I think Verso Energy should really be commended for that. And it's been a pleasure working with everyone in the company and learning from them about their work on a variety of things, ranging from hydrogen projects to also renewable energy projects and batteries. So that's it's a fantastic company with a lot of great people working there, and great leadership. So it's been a real pleasure working with them as well. And then lastly, I think I should thank the French government for the CIFRA contract, which supports people doing industrial PhDs like mine. I think it's a really good idea, and I don't think it's done enough in Australia. So I think that's something that's quite great here in France. And then I also mentioned in my manuscript, but thank you to the French government for the healthcare you have provided over the last few years, because I've made good use of that. So thank you, everyone.